This Hunter solo build melts everything. Now I've got two versions of this build today, which is going to let your Hunter on the solo subclass just dominate everything in the game, using those solo melee abilities. Now the first version is going to be dedicated to the Caliban's hand, with the proximity explosive knives, which you'll use mostly in lighter PvE content. And then the second version of this build will be made with the Assassin's Cowl, as well as the knife trick melee, which you can then use in pretty much any activity, even harder content, but I'd still strongly recommend using these builds in content up to legend difficulty, as mostly a fun PvE build to use when you're bored of using other builds. But either way, both of these builds will achieve the same goal, and that's infinite solo melees as long as you don't miss your targets. So you do want to get the final blow on those enemies with those melee abilities, which is why this build is better used in lower tier content rather than taking them into say a Grandmaster Nightfall, because although the build is good, you gotta be realistic. That knife melee ain't gonna kill GM ads. It will damage them, but it ain't killing them. So guys, if you like this one, then feel free to leave a rating, comment what builds you're running lately, subscribe for more like this, and now let's go throw some knives. Roll the intro. Now before we jump into the build, like every build video, I will first mention that the full playlist of new and updated builds is linked down below, which is where you'll find all my latest builds up to date for Season of the Deep. So make sure to go check that out later, because you might just find your new best build. But with this one today, this is your updated solo melee ability build for the Hunter, and what we're going to get out of this build are infinite melees. Whether you want to go the explosive route or you just want to go a bit more sneaky with Assassin's Cowl, then you can achieve both. But you're also going to be Radiant infinitely for higher weapon DPS, you're going to get Restoration for extra survivability, and you're also going to get faster supers, which is why this build is great when playing lower tier content solo, but you still have a few rough ads or bosses roaming around, because you will have your super pretty consistently too. But the one main thing I really like about these builds are the infinite melees that just tear through easy ads, so you just don't even need to use your weapons if you don't want to. Just don't lose those knives, because you're probably not going to get it back for a while. But either way, we'll be using a bunch of mods and fragments to ensure that if we do mess up, we'll have a solution to get those abilities back a little bit quicker. Now the way you'll use this build for version 1 with Assassin's Cowl is you'll first use your melee to kill an ad or ads, which is going to make you go invisible, as well as giving you Radiant, an Orb of Power, and spawning Fire Sprite. Then picking up the Fire Sprite will give you Restoration for health. From here you just run around infinitely killing ads with melees, and that's pretty much it. You'll get your super pretty fast while also spawning orbs. Then you can use things like a healing grenade as a backup for restoration and health if you ever need to. For the second version with Calibans, you're going to pretty much do the same thing, kill ads with your melee, but instead it's going to be an explosive one, which is really good for ad clearing. But the downside to this variant is that you won't have restoration consistently, because you won't be scorching enemies as much, you'll be blowing them up instead, and you won't be going invisible either. So this one is more of a mess around build in the easiest content for Destiny 2, rather than taking this build seriously in endgame content, because the first version you could take into harder content if you want to. It won't be the best build in the game, but it'll be reasonably okay. Personally, I wouldn't take any of these builds into endgame though, because that melee just isn't strong enough to deal with those ads. But a infinite melee spam is just insanely fun when you can actually kill those ads in easier modes. Now getting into the setup of these builds and going through both builds here. For the loadout you can use anything you want, it really doesn't matter. But for the subclass, you're going to want to make a few slight changes depending on which variant of the build you go with, because in a way they're very similar but also different as they require a few different things. So for the Assassin's Cowl route, you want to run any super of your choice, preferably the Blade Barrage. Then you want a Gambler's Dodge. This is so that we can get our melee back if we mess up with it by just dodging near an enemy. Then you want a Knife Trick melee. You can either use the Knife Trick or the other throw knife, but if you're bad like me, you're probably going to miss with it, so ideally you want to run the Knife Trick, because it's actually quite hard to miss, unless you're really bad. Otherwise, the grenade we have is the healing one, so that we can get restoration as a backup when we need it. Aspects, we got Knock 'em Down, your solo supers are enhanced, so Blade Barrage will launch more projectiles, but while Radiant, final blows with your knife fully refunds it. So that's how we get the infinite melees, and this just flows really nicely with Assassin's Cowl for that infinite invis on every single kill. It does even save you occasionally if you take this into harder content, but it's quite a hard build to use unless you go into easier game modes. Anyway, for the second aspect, we have On Your Mark. This doesn't actually matter, I'm only using this for the 3 extra fragment slots. So for those fragments, we have Ember of Ashes so that we can apply more scorch stacks to targets. Great since our melee is scorching everything anyway. Ember of Torches, our powered melee attacks make us and nearby allies radiant. This you 100% want on, and we will get extra damage for our weapons because of this too. But moving on, Ember of Staring, so defeating scorched targets grants melee energy and creates a fire sprite, and that fire sprite is going to give us grenade energy, but because we're also running the Ember of Mercy, picking up that fire sprite is going to give us restoration too. Then the last fragment I have here is just Ember of Solace, so that those radiant and restoration effects can last just a little bit longer. Just make sure you're running the Assassin's Cowl exotic with this build if you want that invis, because powered melee final blows will give you invisibility as well as health and shields, so it's a great exotic for extra survivability. Now before I get to the mods, because the mods for both are actually a lot different too, if you're using the Caliban's hand, what this does is allow your proximity knife to scorch targets it damages with its explosions or ignites them on final blows, and after throwing one, you get increased melee regeneration until the knife explodes. You basically have infinite knives, and the scorching doesn't really matter anyway, because everything's just going to blow up most of the time, especially when you're taking this into easy content. Just make sure that in the subclass, if you're using this exotic, that you have the proximity explosive knives equipped as the melee ability, because that's what this version of the build is focused around. The other stuff for the subclass is the same except one fragment. You want to remove Ember of Ashes that gives you more scorch stacks and replace it with Ember of Singeing. You don't need either of these fragments, but this is the choice I went for anyway. As for the mods for variant 1, we have 3 hands-on in the helmet so that we can get super energy on melee kills. This is with the Assassin's Cowl. Then for the arms, we have a heavy-handed for orbs on melee kills along with a grenade kickstart to get extra grenade energy when using it. Chest armor, I just have my damage resist mods. Legs, I have 1 absolution to reduce all ability cooldowns when picking up orbs, just in case we need that extra energy for any reason. And then 2 innovations to reduce the grenade cooldown each time we pick up an orb of power. Since we're getting infinite melees anyway, our second priority will be our healing grenades. Then for the class armor, I just have 1 distribution and 2 bombers for more cooldowns to those abilities. For variant 2 with Calibans, the only things you want to change are firstly in the arms, you want 2 focusing strikes with your heavy-handed mod so that we can get our class ability back quicker. In the legs you want 2 installation mods again for the quicker class cooldown, and in the class itself you want 2 utility kickstarts and a bomber. So everything for the first variant is focused towards grenades after the melee, and then the second variant is focusing towards the class ability, because it's somewhat easier to lose the melee ability with Calibans more than it is with the first version. So having that dodge back quicker to get another one instantly is our priority. As for the stats, you want mobility and resilience to 100 if you can. This will help you with extra survivability and the cooldown for your dodge. Otherwise, this here is the artifact setup, but there's not really anything benefiting us for this season other than the cheaper melee mods. So you can use this build in any season and it will work exactly the same, unless anything major changes like any buffs or nerfs with the subclass itself. So overall, this build is probably one of the most fun hunter builds right now for the solo subclass this season, especially for ad clearing with infinite melees, but it is best used in easier content and while playing solo. But guys, if this build isn't for you and you want to up your game slightly, then be sure to check out my new Season 21 build playlist down below, where you can find all my top, latest and best builds for Destiny 2 Season of the Deep this season, because you might just find your new best build in there. But guys, until the next one, have a good one and I'll see you soon. Peace out guys.